What if habits formed in the first 2 years of life leave traces in the brain, visible even a decade later? What if early screen exposure doesn't just affect attention, but shapes how the brain learns, adapts, and regulates anxiety? A new neuroscience study suggests exactly that. On Introduction. What if habits formed in the first 2 years of life leave traces in the brain, visible even a decade later? A new study published in eBiomedicine suggests that early screen exposure may be linked to long-term changes in brain function and increased anxiety during adolescence. These conclusions are not opinions. They are based on longitudinal data and brain imaging. 2. What the researchers studied. This was a longitudinal study. The researchers followed the same group of children from infancy into adolescence. They examined screen time exposure before the age of 2, long-term changes in functional brain organization, and later outcomes related to cognitive speed and anxiety. Crucially, the findings were supported by MRI brain data, not only behavioral reports. 3. What changed in the brain? The most important findings involve brain networks responsible for visual processing, cognitive control, and information processing speed. In children with higher early screen exposure, these networks appeared to mature earlier. However, and this is critical, they also showed reduced flexibility later on. In other words, the brain may become specialized too early at the cost of adaptive plasticity. 4. Behavioral and emotional outcomes. During adolescence, these neural patterns were associated with slower cognitive processing, increased difficulty in decision-making, and higher levels of anxiety. The authors emphasize that this does not prove direct causation. However, it does demonstrate a stable association between early brain development conditions and later emotional and cognitive traits. 5. Why the first 2 years matter. The first 2 years of life represent a period of extreme neuroplasticity. During this time, the brain is learning to regulate arousal, shift attention, and form stable neural circuits. Rapid high-intensity screen stimulation may overload sensory systems, shifting development away from active interaction toward more passive forms of stimulation. Practical block. On-screen bullet points. Signature channel feature. Practical implications based on neuroscience evidence. 1. Minimize passive screen exposure before age 2, especially non-interactive content. 2. If screens are used, co-view with an adult, talk, label, respond, and engage emotionally. 3. Balance screens with active sensory experiences, movement, touch, face-to-face communication. 4. Protect sleep and circadian rhythms. Sleep deprivation amplifies sensory overload effects. 5. Remember, brain flexibility matters more than early acceleration. These are not bans. They are environmental tuning strategies. 6. Study limitations. The researchers clearly state that this is an observational study. It cannot establish direct cause and effect relationships. However, the combination of long-term follow-up and neuroimaging data makes the findings particularly robust. 7. Closing early brain development is not a race for stimulation. It is about balance. And modern neuroscience increasingly shows that what shapes the brain early in life can echo many years later. This was the latest neuroscience and medical discoveries.